Hello, thanks for joining me. Today is slightly different because I'm not going to be talking about kits. I'm going to be talking about strangely lawnmowers, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history to start with as to why I'm doing this. Hopefully I'm not going to bore you for too long. I'm not one for the sound of my own voice. But a few years ago I, for one reason or another, for personal reasons, decided to give up work, and I, like many people, was going to make a living from making stuff out of wood, and I've made a variety of things over time. I've made Suffolk latches and wooden bolts and whatever, and pens and bowls, and you name it. I've done lots and lots of that stuff. To cut a long story short, I couldn't sell them for love nor money. So anyone that makes a living from turning wooden stuff, A, I'm quite jealous of you, and B, you deserve a medal, because it's extremely difficult to do. And that's why the business has changed from doing that to selling kits, which I have to say I love. I love the process of developing new kits and getting stuff out on the market that currently isn't or wasn't available in the UK. However, there's one wooden item that we have continued to make up until now, and that was rollers for cylinder mowers, vintage and old cylinder mowers, because the parts for those are extremely difficult to get. And as we know, wood turning is hopefully a little bit of a skill. Some of us have more skill than others. I consider myself possibly down to the bottom end of the skill level rather than the top end. Because of the way our business has grown and changed over the last couple of years, we're really in no longer a position to carry on making the wooden cylinder mower rollers. I simply just don't have the time to do it anymore. So this video is to try and explain to you how I go around making wooden cylinder mowers, because if we get any more inquiries, I'm going to have to hand it back to whoever, and we generally try and put people in touch with wood turning clubs and such, because normally there's somebody out there or a couple of people out there who are quite prepared to do them. I've made an awful lot over the last couple of years, so I hope I'm fairly well practiced at it. I'm going to run through the process that I use. I'm not going to say it's the only way of doing it, but the process that I use, and there's bits of about doing these rollers that isn't particularly easy, and one of the most difficult things, well, two of the most difficult things actually. One is actually getting the wood, because when the manufacturers originally made lawnmowers, they knew exactly what spec they were going to have to make them to, so they could buy wood in bulk and drill the holes that would assist in the drying out and seasoning of the wood with a hole drilled in, knowing it was the right size. The disadvantage that you and I have is that we don't know until someone comes along and says, I've got a Ransom 65 mower and it's got a spindle that's 13mm in there, so I need a 16mm hole in the centre, 16mm bore. We don't know that until they come to tell us, so we have to keep our wood whole and seasoned. And when it gets up to big wood, and we have done rollers probably 85-90mm in diameter, that's a pretty big roller, and to season that size wood is difficult to get. I've managed to find some that's sort of 10-12 year old air dried wood, but it's not easy to get hold of. So that's one of the problems, and the other problem is actually drilling a bore in the centre of the roller itself to get it in the centre, but I'm going to run through that. I hope this helps. We're not trying to sell you kits or anything else. I'm just trying to impart a little information, so I hope it's useful. I've got some wood already cut from a huge great big plank that I managed to get hold of. I'm going to be making them out of ash today. I normally make rollers out of ash. Traditionally, very old mowers up to about the 1920s had rollers made of ash, and in the 1920s they generally changed to beech because of the cost and availability of beech was much better. My apologies if there's some lawnmower historians out there that don't agree with me. I bow to your superior knowledge, but that is my understanding of it. So let's have a look at what I've got cut and the process of going around making the rollers, and I hope it helps somebody. I'm going to start off by just showing you that this is the great lump of wood that I've taken my blanks from, because I know a chap that cuts down trees and keeps lots and lots of stuff air drying, and he doesn't do much with ash, so he tends to leave that air dried instead of kiln drying it. He does oak for the kiln dried stuff, and oak isn't particularly suitable for lawnmower rollers. it can be done. You can do them in whatever you like at the end of the day, but traditionally they are either ash or beech. So I've got a couple of blanks here cut. Here's the first one, because I am actually going to make my final set for a customer today. This is fairly straightforward because this is a short one, and these are for two ends of the lawnmower. Now I use auger bits to cut the bores, and you can have one of these auger bits, which is I can't remember how long it is, probably 120 mil, something like that, or a slightly longer one when it comes for a longer roller. And occasionally you have to do a really long one and you need one of these beasts, and I have to warn anyone that's got one of these, do not use one of these at high speed. These, the longer they are, the more they flex, and you can probably see that flexing slightly there. If you have these on high speed in any drill and they bend, and I have had one bend on me from having it going too fast, it will spin round and potentially gut you in the process. So these need to be going pretty slow. The other blank I've got is this one here, and this is about 150 mils long, and these are really quite tricky to get drilled down the centre. So I'm hoping that I've cut this big enough. Sometimes what you have to do with these is to actually cut the blank bigger, just in case the drill goes at a slight angle, because what you need to do is have the bore absolutely central. You could try and drill it from both ends, but I never like doing that, because I don't believe that you're actually going to get it central, and then if it's not central it won't spin on its axis quite as it should do. So this really is the most difficult bit, and I'm going to go over to the pillar drill and do the drilling of both of these parts. There's quite a high chance, I have to say, that one or two of them won't be any good and I'll have to go and cut a bigger blank, but we'll see as we go on. I'm going to go a step back actually, because I've got an old roller here that I'm going to show you. If I hold that up to the camera, this is an old one off my late father's lawnmower, and I have replaced it some time ago, but you can see how these get. It's woodworm eaten, there's bits chipped off there. It's still usable, but it's not in great condition, and this was one of the better ones. Some of the others had ended up pretty much triangular in shape, they'd rotted away that much. So these are the bits that we're looking to replace on the mower, and they, as I say, they look easy, not quite as easy as they at first appear perhaps. I've got the first blank in here. It's not completely square, as you'll see from that, because with the weird shaped block I've cut it from. It is cut flat on the bottom though, so I'm going to set it in there like so, and I am going to mark the centre. I'm going to go from corner to corner, which is going to give me hopefully as close to the centre as I need to be. Right, so there's my centre point there. I'm going to clamp that in. Now this is the point where you really need to make sure, if you can, get this in as level as possible. You don't want this going in at any odd angles, because if it goes in at an odd angle, because this bit of wood is roughly 60mm by 60mm, and the size rollers I'm making are actually 55mm, so I've only got 5mm to play with on this blank. If I had a huge one, it wouldn't really matter if it went in at a funny angle. The grain's going to look a bit odd when you cut it, but that's neither here nor there really. So I've got this in the vise. I'm going to turn it so the handles are at the back. This is spinning clockwise, and what you don't want to do, I'm sure I probably don't need to give people lessons in using a pillar drill, but you will need a fair sized pillar drill to do this, is have that way, because the drill is going to try and spin that round there. So I'm not going to clamp it to the base, because I'm going to need to move this in and out lots and lots in order to drill the holes for all these blanks. But I'm just going to put that on the back to stop that spinning round that way, and I'm just going to draw the base up so we're somewhere near the centre there, and lock that off. Now with this short one, it's possible that I might get through in one go. With the longer ones, what I'm going to have to do is to move the table up and down in order to get a long drill bit through these blanks. The next thing to consider is with an auger bit. With this not clamped down, what's going to happen with the auger bit is the auger bit is going to try and pull the wood up. So I've got to brace that down. I could clamp it if I want to. It's just my personal preference. I prefer just to hold it by hand. we'll see what happens. It's possible, if you wish to do so, to put a pilot hole in there, because you can see the screw at the, you might not be able to see it on the camera at that distance, but the screw part, the first screw part of the auger bit it is a screw part, and it will be trying to pull that wood up. So if you put a pilot hole in first, probably of around about, I'm guessing now, 6.5 millimeters in there, you can go straight down and then drill in a straight line. But for the purposes of this video, because I'm trying to make it as quick as I can, I'm just going to drill this out. The speed that I have this drill at is 720 RPM. It's entirely up to you, and it will depend on what wood you're using as to what speed you have. And here is a prime example. I've just drilled that through. It hasn't gone all the way through to the bottom yet. I'll be able to feel it. So what I've actually got to do is bring the table up a little bit and the drill bit into the blank, lock that off again, and I can now start, and I'll hopefully be able to drill all the way through. And as you'll see now, this is only a short one, so when it comes to a long one, it's quite a bit more difficult to do the drilling. And hopefully what we'll have there is a nice clean hole in this end, and it is pretty much centered there, so we can now mount that and turn that on the lathe. But I'm now going to try and drill one of the longer blanks, and for the longer blanks, which is this one here, this is the next one that's going to go in, I'm going to use a short drill bit to start with. They get hot too. A short drill bit to start with, to try and get that as central as I can, and then I'm going to swap to a longer drill bit to finally finish off and get the hole down the centre. I'm not sure if the camera can pick up the little bit of smoke coming off that. Very, very hot indeed. And you can see when we look at the bottom, that's come out. It's not far off. It's probably okay on this size. I think we're about right. We're centre on there, not quite out the bottom there, and that's why, as I've said before, you might need to look at a slightly larger blank, because I've drilled that pretty much as centrally as I can. So we'll go on, and I'm going to do the rest of those blanks now and hope we get them in the middle, and then we can go over to the lathe and do the turning part. Right, so here's one of my shorter blanks that I'm going to do. I've got the chuck on. I've made myself a little drive here, just a wooden drive. This is made of ash as well, because ash drives ash actually quite well. I've marked on here the position of the jaws, because I've used this time and time again, so I know which bit fits in which part of the chuck. So I'll get that in nice and tight. I've got a live centre at the other end of the lathe, and it's then simply a question of mounting that. And the next thing we're going to do is just turn this round and double check on the spec that we've got, because you will need a spec. And here's one of ours that we use. I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's actually quite unusual. This is a tapered roller, so it should be 55 mils at one end and 50 mils at the other end. So I'm going to turn it round to about 55 mils to start with, and then we're going to look at getting the length absolutely spot on. Now the reason for doing that is that because we're turning between these 2 points, if we turn it the right shape to start with and then trim a little bit off, this could actually move slightly, because the point where it's suspended at this end at the moment will move inward slightly. So it's literally a case of turn it round, get it the right length, then we'll put it back on and do the final shaping and finishing. So I've taken it from square to round. The next thing I'm going to do is just use a parting tool just to straighten off one end. having got that bit level at this end, I now need to measure the length for my spec and take off this end here. And I'll just double check that length with the calipers, and I'm not sure if the camera will pick that up. 74.99 millimeters. I normally make these to within a tolerance of about 1 millimeter. 74.99 is pretty good in my opinion, so there we go. But you will see that we've got a little bit of spare wood at this end and a little bit of spare wood, you can't see it, but there's a tiny bit at this end. So what I'm now going to do is actually take the roller off the lathe, and I'm going to pop it over to the belt sander and just sand off that end there and sand off that end there. It's also important, obviously, as well as having sharp tools, to make sure when you're cutting these ends you do it absolutely perpendicular. What you don't want to do is be going in at a slight angle, because you'll get a dip and then the rollers won't run properly. So I'm just going to sand these ends off here, and then we'll look at the shaping and sizing of it once it's come back on, because there will be a slight movement once these parts have been removed. So you can see I've taken that over to the belt sander. It's flat on that side and it's flat on that side, so we're going to remount it now and then turn it again to its final dimension on the outside. So that might look like a laborious process, because I prefer to use these digital calipers rather than wood turners calipers. I find them far more accurate, and when I'm trying to get down to a spec within a millimetre, I can't do that with wood turners calipers. You may prefer to use them and you may be fine with them, but that's just my preference. So I've got this to pretty much 55 mils. I've actually set the calipers for 55.3 because I'm going to have to sand these down as well. So I've left myself a little bit of room for manoeuvre. We can always make them a bit smaller, but if you take too much off, obviously you can't stick it back on again afterwards. So the next thing I'm going to do, because these are tapered, is take this edge down to 50 millimeters, and we're going to taper this 55 to 50 millimeters. So I've done the chamfering now. No, I haven't. So what I've done is got 55 millimeters at this end, 50 millimeters at that end, so it's tapered down towards this end. I'm now going to put a chamfer at each end. I've tried to do this many ways. I've tried marking it with a pencil and measuring it, but because of the width of a pencil mark, I actually find by far the easiest way of getting it accurate is to do it by eye. So I guess the skew going at 45 degrees each end, and I'll then use the bowl sander to finish off afterwards. Finishing, of course, is entirely up to you. I'm using my homemade bowl sander, or actually two of them. I'm going to go with 180 to 240 to 400, a little bit of 400 at either end just to smooth that off, and then it's pretty much finished. Now, doing this long roller, you'll see that I've started off with a slightly longer one, so I've trimmed it off and I've got a little end on there. I'm going to just trim that off on the bandsaw and then sand it down, and it's this that will potentially send out and give you a skew-if roller if you don't do the ends first. If that wasn't centered on there and we're spinning it between those two ends and get it to the right size, and we then shorten it, you're moving the points at which it rotates and your roller won't be completely round. It's probably not the end of the world, but I just like to get them right. So I always do the length, trim off, remount, and then do the final finishing and final measuring. Now, having trimmed off the ends, if there was any movement, when I put it back on and turn the lathe on, you would see if there was any change in the direction, because you'll see a movement in the top and bottom. Actually, this one that happens to be dead straight. I can't see any movement, but I'm now just going to do the final trimming to get the exact measurements on here and do the chamfers on this as well. So there we have. I'll hold those up because they're tapered at the ends. One set of solid ash rollers. hopefully the customer will be pleased with those. Rick, if you're watching, these are your rollers for your mower, which is I'm guessing a probably 23 inch cut, so it's quite a big mower. I hope that that's been helpful. So if anyone does come and ask you if you could make a set of mower rollers, I've shown you what I think is one of the best and easiest and most accurate ways to do them. I'm going to double check the measurements on these now, but I'm absolutely positive that these are within the 1mm spec that I offer when cutting them. Well, I hope that's been useful for one or two of you out there, or if you've got a lawnmower that you need to get some new rollers on. I can't recommend highly enough buying yourself a lathe and taking a wood turning. It's a huge amount of fun. So we can look at this two ways. To the wood turners, hopefully I've shown you how to make your rollers, and for someone that needs rollers, maybe I can persuade you to have a go at wood turning. I hope that over the last couple of years we've helped save a few of the old lawnmowers. They're so much better than modern lawnmowers in my opinion, and I feel quite honoured that we've helped to keep on the lawns of Britain some classic old mowers, some of which are quite rare. So many thanks for watching. I hope it's been of help. If we can help anyone with anything, please feel free to get in touch with us via Facebook or on the website. Always happy to hear from you. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in our next video. Bye bye now, take care.